welcome to the 15th and final week of our journey through government class. What a long, strange trip it's been, huh? In this last unit, we're going to take a look at what we have learned and how we can apply it to help our country become the best it can be. This final lesson will describe the basic ways that people view government, and we're going to look at a little bit more, kind of like we did last week, at a couple of instances in modern day debate or modern day life where the interest of government and people sometimes are at odds, and there are some very legitimate, essential, but very thorny questions we must answer. The first part of this lesson focuses on the strange relationship between the government and religion, that is to say, religion and, of course, the First Amendment. First Amendment says that Congress cannot establish an official national religion. Many other nations have done that. Even in modern days, Church of England is still directly under the government, control of the government of the UK. Of course, before governments, as we know them, were formed, that is to say, representative democracies, the religion was whatever the king told you it was. We say Congress cannot prohibit the free exercise of religion, but the government cannot be involved in it, yet we've seen government proclamations on Thanksgiving and whatnot. Suffice to say, this is a very delicate tightrope that the government has to walk. Free exercise of religion by government can create the possibility of government recognition of religious belief, which then, of course, naturally can lead to the possibility of government favoring of religion, one religion or another. The phrase separation of church and state is not specifically mentioned in the Constitution, but it is derived from the Constitution. That is to say, people have looked at the Constitution and have concluded that the document calls for functionally a separation between church and state. We have a little bit of evidence in that respect insofar as one of the founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, when he was president, weighed in specifically on the issue of government and religion. He said there is, quote, a wall of separation between church and state. Now, that phrase has become kind of the standard imagery for those who are debating state versus religion issues. And the idea of that wall being there has been used to justify a lot of different things. It has been used to justify government restrictions of religion in some cases, and for free exercise of religion. It's in practice, that wall is a little leaky, and the degree to which we want to plug those holes is entirely up to us. A religious activity of the state is not necessarily the establishment of a religion, but you can see where it could be viewed as such, and therefore that delicate balance, we have to recognize that, yes, we don't want government involved in education, but at that same time, some people want the government protection of religion, which is okay. But does government protection of religion amount to endorsing that religion? These are tough questions. There's no magic button we can push to solve all these questions. They are thorny. And again, what do we always say? Thank God we can debate them, because the day we can't debate them, we're not free. They didn't debate freedom of religion in medieval Europe under kings and duchies and whatnot. The religion was whatever you were told it was. Now, the Supreme Court over the years has been involved in several different cases, again, trying to define that wall, or lack thereof, between the state and religion. Supreme Court has recognized the essential religious nature and religious needs of the American people. In Champaign, Illinois, they adopted a policy that allowed non-school employees to teach religious instruction classes to students who volunteered for them. In 1948, though, the court struck down the policy as a violation of separation of church and state, even though the participation was purely voluntary. The fact that the class even existed, the court said, amounted to a government endorsement of religion. The Supreme Court has made a distinction between the state giving assistance to students who attend religious schools versus giving assistance directly to those schools. For example, if you go to an overtly religious college or university, Liberty being the most conspicuous example around here, the government will not give Liberty U direct money, but they will fund the scholarships for students who attend Liberty. Again, government is very heavily involved, obviously, in tuition and whatnot. So yes, the government has claimed a role there in terms of being able to fund students at religious schools, but not to fund the schools. And over the years, the court has sort of come up with, more or less, a three-part test to determine whether a law respects the Establishment Clause of the Constitution. First off, the statute has to have a secular legislative purpose. Secondly, its principal or primary effect must be one that neither advances nor inhibits religion, trying to be neutral in that sense. And finally, these statutes cannot foster what the courts call, quote, an excessive government entanglement with religion. So not only do we not want to get government directly involved in religion, we don't even want it to get tangled up with it in any stretch. And again, go back to that delicate balance. This is what we're looking for because we prize religious freedom. We also prize the fact that government does not directly get involved in it, if at all possible. Prayer and Bible reading questions in public schools have been a big issue over the year. And if you think about it, schools, for most people, the school system is going to be their greatest and most frequent interaction with government. Unless you're employed by the government, the public school system, namely the state and local governments, is going to be the means through which a lot of people interact with government. And because so much of, particularly for children, their waking hours are in these government institutions, then we're going to have lots of questions settled about religion in the course of attending school. So the question about prayer in schools has been pretty well settled. Government, in this case government being the schools, cannot lead such an issue, such a thing. That is a clear violation of the Establishment Clause of the Constitution. Any required Bible reading, I know there are some schools that offer optional Bible classes if you want to. The question over a moment of silence, prayer or meditation, if you call it, it all depends upon what you call it. If you call it a moment of silence or a meditation, that's okay. But if you invoke the specter of someone praying, that's seen as religious. Again, these are court cases. One that I remember from just 25 years ago, I was doing news in South Boston, and right before the graduation that year from Halifax County High School, the Supreme Court came up with a ruling that school-sponsored prayer at a public high school graduation ceremony was a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. And the trick was, it can't be like listed on the program. Here's a prayer from Reverend whomever of the local church. It cannot be on the program. It cannot be planned. It cannot be compulsory. What happened was, and what's happened at many graduations since then, is that the prayer was begun spontaneously by the students, which of course is okay. Also, if you are one of the speakers at a public school graduation, you have broad liberties as to what you can bring up. The Pledge of Allegiance over the years has been the target for, again, separation of church and state. The most conspicuous case there was actually just 16 years ago. Michael Newdow, I remember the name, guy in California, sued the local school district on behalf of his daughter, from whom he was estranged. Oddly enough, he was divorced. And said that it was a violation of the Establishment Clause of the Constitution, separating church from state, because of the one phrase that was added later, one nation under God. Well, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld his case. They call them the Ninth Circus Court of Appeals for a reason. They are very, very far left. That's changing a little bit, but man, they have issued some curious rulings over the years. The Ninth Federal Circuit Court, of course, upheld his complaint, his lawsuit. The Supreme Court shot it down, not only shot it down, but shot it down unanimously, with 4 liberal justices joining 4 conservative jurists. Antonin Scalia did not participate in this debate. They ruled that in this case, Newdow did not have a legal standing to bring the suit. He could not demonstrate that he was injured in any way because of this. Now, of course, that leaves open the question, they still didn't answer the question of, does one nation under God constitute a violation? That phrase in the Pledge of Allegiance, does that cause the Pledge of Allegiance to violate the Establishment Clause of the Constitution? There was no ruling on this, but Judge Rehnquist, in his ruling in that case, said there's no way you can claim that the nation's history of recognizing God's sovereignty is a violation of church and state. You're just acknowledging history. Get the feeling that case might come back at some point, but for right now, there's been sort of an uneasy truce settled on that, and so it goes. Other places where public endorsement of religion possibilities, some of the displays of the 10 Commandments, like this one you see that was outside the Alabama Supreme Court not quite 20 years ago, a very handsome-looking statue of the 10 Commandments. Judge Roy Moore was ordered by a lower court to remove the 10 Commandments. He refused. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to review the case, so the 11th Circuit ruling was upheld and the 10 Commandments had to be removed. Now, Moore, in his defense, said that this was not an endorsement of religion. This was simply recognizing the rule, or the role that the 10 Commandments had made, or had played, in what we call modern jurisprudence. In Western culture, these were the first set of written codifications that societies were based upon. So it's sort of like, in his view, honoring a relic of law and order. The Circuit Court, in this case, saw it differently. They saw it as, again, government tacitly or non-tacitly endorsing religion. The Supreme Court has had mixed rulings on display of the 10 Commandments in certain groups, and we constantly have cases on both sides, generated by atheists and by Christians, to try to constantly test the limits of religious liberty and the freedom to have government not involved in religion. On both sides, again, staunch Christians, staunch atheists, who have been have basically created court cases over the years to try to get the courts to answer these questions. Now, the good news is courts are where these questions should be answered. We should not be leaving these questions up to Congress. This is not a legislative function yet. Congress can pass laws, but again, the supreme law of the land is the Constitution. And so judicial interpretations of what the Constitution says about religious liberty, that's what the questions we're trying to figure out. We're trying to figure out where the line will be drawn. It's changing. We are becoming, by anyone's standard, a more secular society. So the atheistic views on a lot of these are becoming the winning views, again, in recent vintage. The Supreme Court over the past couple of centuries has declared several practices unconstitutional, which were once integral parts of American life. Prayer and Bible reading in schools, prayers at high school graduations, display of nativity scenes on public squares. The Supreme Court has chipped away at that quite a bit. The bottom line here, though, is, and we're Christian, and this is a Christian institution that we're teaching here from this homeschool foundation, we should not expect the state to do the job that churches do. If you want to share the Word of God, you do that through your church. You don't have to do that through a government institution. If you want to help someone, you do that through your church, not through government taxation. Remember what libertarian Jesus said? Yeah. The state should not be the instrument through which we offer charity. It should be the church. We have subcontracted that out, unfortunately, to the government. So, as a Christian, you may feel slighted by some of these court rulings, but they might be the best thing ever for Christianity. They're forcing Christians to use the church to do these things and not rely on the government to do these things. We've got to look beyond government for means by which we can be Christians. So yes, these rulings might have upset some Christians, but I think in the long run, they are good. The second lesson of this unit talks about reforming government, and we have talked about this before, particularly when we talked about federal funding of issues. Bring the graph up again. Good Lord, this is the increase in federal spending since 1970. 50 years ago. Now, if you want to take it back further, in fiscal year 1933, during the heart of the Great Depression, we spent $4.6 billion in 1933. In our most recent federal budget, it is approaching $5 trillion. That is a more than 1,000% increase in the course of 4 generations. Our population did not go up by 1,000 during that time. Inflation did not go up by 1,000% at that time. The usual cry of Republicans is that the Democrats are the party of tax and spend. In 1994, when Republicans took over the House and Senate, it was the first time in 2 generations, 40 plus years, that Republicans had control of the purse strings. Unfortunately, it turned out they spent just about as bad as the Democrats did. Maybe not quite as bad, but it was bad. That having been said, if you have 2 dominant parties and both of them are significantly interested in increasing spending and by proxy the power of government, how in the world are you going to reform government? Any significant reform of our government has to be revolving around the fact that such growth is eventually unsustainable. It cannot be done. Will the national debt ever be paid off? Will a cabinet department ever be eliminated? Will a simple government program ever be stopped? There's nothing so permanent, Reagan said, as a temporary government program. Once these programs start, they don't stop. Because what happens when they start? People start relying on them. The people who are receiving the assistance from the program and those who are employed in carrying out the program. If you cut that off immediately, the people who are getting the assistance are mad. The people who are providing the assistance are mad. They don't vote for you then. You don't get returned to office. What possible incentive do you have to stop spending? The answer is zero. As it stands right now, there is zero incentive for the government to do anything else other than grow and provide more cookies for more people, so more people are pleased with their Congress critter, and they will re-elect them. Being free of government is the opposite of being dependent on government. It should be more attractive. But what did I talk about last week when we looked at the way communism denied human nature and capitalism harnessed human nature? The same argument in reverse here. Increasing government spending and the goodies that they give out is human nature. It is human nature for us on the receiving end to say, yes, it's better to receive than to give. Yes, the help that the government's giving me to pay this off or get my health care. Yeah, I like that. It's human nature to like that. It is not human nature to appreciate having that assistance taken away from you. Unfortunately, if we are ever going to curtail federal spending, we are going to have to go against human nature. We're going to have to lean into the damn strike zone and take one for the team at some point. Everybody is, and nobody wants to. Nobody's going to be the first to volunteer for that, for discomfort. That means it's going to be very difficult. I don't see how it can be done right now, based upon the current climate. maybe by the time you guys are my age, there will be at least the momentum towards beginning the process. That's how long it's going to take, I fear, without a revolution of some sort. A good start would be a simpler government with fewer regulations. There is no reason, none, why our tax policy could not fit on an index card. But no, it takes up, 423,000 pages now, the U.S. tax code. No one knows all of that. That's why we have an entire army of people, public and private, whose entire careers, entire livelihoods are dependent upon interpreting that tax code created by government. Who says government doesn't create jobs, right? If the U.S. tax code were simple enough to fit on an index card, where there were virtually no, there was a flat rate, more or less, maybe some exceptions here or there. If there were very few, if any, loopholes and exemptions, then we would have an awful lot of CPAs out of work. But it would be worth it. Sorry, CPAs. It would be worth it. Think about the benefits alone of getting rid of the IRS. That would be cool. The lesson mentions about the ways we can impact government. We've talked about these at length before. Again, we are in an enviable situation here in the U.S. where we do have influence. Now, you can argue about the amount of influence we have, but it does exist. We have public squares, we have letters to the editor, we have letters directly to our congressman, we have the internet where we can express ideas, we have mass media where we can influence the thoughts of people or at least make an appeal to them. We also, believe it or not, have the ability, if we're gluttons for punishment, to run for office. That is a possibility. In governments of yore, you were born into your station. Your influence on the king or the crown or whoever was calling the shots was almost entirely determined by who your parents were, where you were born, how you were born. We have a much more democratic way of doing it now. It's limited. It's always going to be limited. But we have some very enviable possibilities these days that people in the past, not too far distant past either, simply did not have. The fourth lesson from this unit talks about our rights and responsibilities, and it's ground we've covered before, but very quickly, just to kind of look back over this to remind us of some very essential truths here. America is great, but we're not perfect. We can see in our history the majority taking advantage of the minority. That happens way too often. Slavery, the most conspicuous example of that. We have occasionally been bullies in world affairs. Some of our leaders have failed our trusts. Our country is not perfect. Each generation has the responsibility to try to make it a little more perfect, to form a more perfect union, you'll recall from the Declaration of Independence. As Christians, we're supposed to pray for our government leaders. That's tough. I hold no particular fondness for politicians. That's just me. But we are told as Christians to pray for our enemies. That's got to be tougher than praying for our political leaders. It seems the best we can do, and it's not an unreasonable demand by any stretch. Without rights, without responsibilities, rights mean less. We do have certain responsibilities. I want to get your thoughts on these Monday in class. I'm going to read off a list of some of the responsibilities that were written into your textbook, and I want to discuss a few of these on Monday, so keep these little bullet points in your mind as we get ready for Monday. We have the responsibility to live as Christians because in this way we will do the most good for our country. We have the responsibility to influence others for good while not allowing the world to influence us for evil. We have the responsibility to pay the taxes that we legitimately owe. We have the responsibility to serve when called upon, such as in times of emergency. We have the responsibility to obey the laws and to face the consequences when we do not. We have the responsibility to respect our leaders, whether or not we support them or voted for them. We have the responsibility to inform our leaders of our opinions for the purpose of helping, not for tearing down. We have the responsibility to engage in civil debate and to consider, respectfully, other points of view. And finally, we have the responsibility to use our freedoms, such as the right to free speech and the right to bear arms, in a way that shows respect for other people and for our society as a whole. Think about some of those, and I'm going to drop them in your laps on Monday, and we will see what you think about them. The last section is called Two Basic Choices. This is where I might get a little preachy here. Forgive me in advance. But it's not something that we have not talked about before. We have, in the course of this class, discussed several times that continuum, freedom versus security. And it is very true. In terms of how we view the government, that is probably the most fundamental question we can ask. What do you think government should provide, freedom or security? Now, your answer can be both, and you would be correct, because if we did it perfectly, the government would provide just enough security to have you fully enjoy your freedom, and conversely, to give you just enough freedom to where you can be secure. Again, you can say both, but it really is a continuum. It's a balancing act. If you ask people in Western Europe, UK, France, Spain, Germany, Scandinavia, Portugal, if they value freedom or security, most of them are going to say security. They lived through the horrors of World War II, their grandfathers did, and in response they have created governments that provide a lot of basic services for people. So to them, security is much more important. If you go to Eastern Europe, the answer that you will get will almost certainly be freedom. Why? Those nations lived in the Soviet bloc, many of them. They know what it's like to live without freedom, or with only a very small amount of freedom, and it's not good. You're equal. You're equally sad, equally miserable with other people. People need regulations, one view says. We can't trust businessmen to do the right thing. We need government workers to keep an eye on them. This view is topped by this view right here. Listen up. The view says, we know what you need. We know what is best for you. We deserve to be in power because we care. We understand. We have a greater vision and we want to solve your problems. We want rich people to pay taxes so we can address the real needs of everyday people. The wealthy can afford it. The poor need more. We will make sure everyone has a minimum level of security. Government needs to be big enough to meet everyone's needs. To do this, you have to supply that government with an unfathomable amount of trust. You are surrendering an awful lot of potential freedom to trust this government to provide you with that security. And of course, there's one great quote in that respect, Ben Franklin. Those who are willing to sacrifice freedom for security will get neither and deserve neither. Keep that in mind. You recall a few, well, yeah, y'all probably too young, which blows my mind, the debate over the Affordable Care Act about 10, 11, 12 years ago, where then House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi infamously said, we have to, actually she was Majority Leader at the time, House Speaker, I'm sorry. She said basically we have to pass the law to find out what's in it. That's become kind of a trope, but basically what she is saying is what the government, this group of people, the, let's come up with some good names for them. We'll call them the Security Caucus, who value security more than freedom. The Security Caucus has less interest in the details of these laws than they do in having the power provided by these laws. Basically, pass the thing, we'll fill in the blanks. We'll tell you what it means if you pass it and give us that authority. If you place your trust in us, we'll go ahead and fill in the blanks of this very, very invasive government policy. And let's be honest, if we're talking about utilizing human nature, the offer of security is an attractive option. What sane person is going to say, boy, I wish I felt insecure today? Nobody wants that. Government programs appear to say we'll take care of all that stuff for you. We'll give you assistance, cradle to grave. We'll provide health care, generous employment benefits. You got to trust us, though. You've got to surrender a lot amount of trust to us. The Security Caucus way of thinking requires us to turn over a lot of trust to the government. But we know people cannot always be trusted. Are bureaucrats not people? Also consider that the people in whom you are trusting pay no price if they are wrong. If they do things that result in you not only losing freedom but losing security as well, guess what? They're still employed. Never give power and authority over yourself to someone who pays no price for being wrong. That's common sense. But to the Security Caucus, that is essential. In order for this guarantee of security to work, you have to turn over a lot of trust to someone. You have to be willing to let those people determine your standard of living and determine most everything else. If you do that, if you let others determine your standard of living, how hard are you going to work to produce, to innovate, to make things better? If, despite all your efforts, you're going to have the same standard of living? If you're not going to be able to fully reap the benefits of your better idea? You're not. So what happens when a nation stops doing that? The nation stops innovating. We stop being a nation of great ideas, a nation of innovation. We cease doing that because the government has removed all of the positive reinforcement that makes development so enticing. Another argument goes that the Security Caucus has good intentions, and that alone is enough to trust them with authority. Now, under this system, under the Security Caucus system, there will be an elite, just as there will be in the other system. The elite, though, are the government people, those who are making the decisions for you, those who pay no price for being wrong. Always be wary of that. Last thing I will mention about this is this one basic fact. Freedom, once you surrender it, is almost impossible to get back. Once you let it go, it ain't coming back unless there is a revolution of some sort. History shows us many, many examples of that. The French Revolution promised equality, liberty, and fraternity. It ended up producing food shortages, mob violence, dictatorial powers, and arbitrary executions. The Russian Revolution, communists promised a workers' paradise. It became anything but. It became shared misery that lasted for 4 generations. Nazis coming to power in Germany promised they would reign as a master race. Nazism brought nothing but death and destruction. Government-backed security is not always secure. Matter of fact, there are very few examples of it really working out as intended. There's a good anecdote during one of the healthcare debates. This is in the mid-'90s. Phil Gramm, a Republican senator from Texas, was the chair of the Senate Health, Education, and Welfare Committee. And he made the point in a debate one day on the floor that The government could never care for your family as much as you can. There's no way the public, the government, could care for your kids as much as you do. One person who supported health care said, no, 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 no. I am fully capable of wanting your children to succeed as much as my children. I am fully capable of caring deeply about your children. Graham said, great. What are their names? There's no incentive for a government worker to provide superior service. Once they have the power, they can pretty much do what they want. Let's move over here to where I reside, the Freedom Caucus. The Freedom Caucus says, we don't know what's best for you because we don't know your situation. Only you do. But we'll do this. We'll work to protect your freedom so you can do whatever it takes to accomplish your dreams. Not our dreams, your dreams. We'll keep the government out of your way. We'll keep taxes and regulations to a minimum, and we'll only do for you what you absolutely cannot do for yourself. For those who don't make it, we'll offer some help. Try to get them on the right track. Try to lend them a hand. We can't guarantee that everyone is going to have the same results, but we will try to make sure you have the same opportunities. There is all the difference in the world between treating people equally and making them equal. One requires hands off, the other requires hands on. This view says that people can accomplish great things and care for themselves if government will simply protect them from basic threats and largely leave them alone. Now, as enticing as that sounds, it's not perfect. We talked last week about the fact that even here in the United States, where we value economic freedom, we collectively have decided that there are some restrictions that are okay. Again, a little bit of freedom that we are surrendering for a little bit of security. Not a lot, but some. Profit makers potentially can be greedy and can exploit workers and can dirty up the water in the atmosphere. We have agreed to adopt laws to try to make sure that does not happen. We have created agencies that will help police this. Because, again, as much as we love freedom, the concept over here, the Freedom Caucus, is not perfect. There are potential pratfalls. What would you prefer? Freedom or security? I think you know what I choose. I choose freedom for a number of reasons, mostly because if I choose freedom, it does not, and you choose security, you don't have to change your views for me. You can still be one who wants the government to protect you. If we adopt your way, though, I cannot be free. I don't have an option to be free under your situation, under your scenario of maximum security. I have no way of being even remotely free. But if we have maximum freedom, there are still ways that our government can keep you secure. Maybe not quite as secure as you would prefer, but there are still options. There are no options the other way. Basically, you have to impose your will upon everybody. My being free does not make many or any impositions on you. That's manners. That's basic manners. Don't think that you have a monopoly on political truth, even if you agree with me or disagree with me. We have to be willing to listen to what other people say. You know why? Occasionally they make a good point. Believe it or not. On occasion, someone who vehemently disagrees with you has the right view. And you will miss it if you automatically dismiss them. One of the greatest problems we have in modern day society is our propensity to see people who disagree with us as evil, as inherently evil, to misattribute their motives at every opportunity. We have lost the ability to disagree without being disagreeable. We should not hate those whose views are different. They are also made in God's image. They can be frustrating. Someone who disagrees with you 100% of the time can be very frustrating. But I'll tell you one thing I have tried to do over the years, and I've done it even more as I've gotten older. I have not only listened to the viewpoints of people who disagree with me, I have actively sought them out. I have found that debating them, or even just conversing with them, not in an adversarial way, makes me a better person. Most importantly, it makes me more sensitive to where they're coming from. And there's no reason in the world why we should not have at least some form of empathy for those who disagree with us. It also has made me realize there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one way to make government work. But more importantly, it just leads to good karma, good returns. If we are always able and willing to listen to the other side. You don't have to sacrifice what you believe in to just listen to the other person and to give them a fair shake to share their views. You don't have to get them fired from their job because you disagree with them. You could think they're the most repugnant thing in the world and still listen to them. That's the thing, though. You cannot look at people who disagree with you and just because they disagree with you, assign nefarious attributes to them. You cannot automatically call them racist or white supremacist. On the other hand, if you are a security lover, you can't call everybody who prefers freedom selfish granny killers. We got to get past that. One of the things, I've said this 1,000 times, one of the things I hope to impart upon you guys is I want you to be thinkers. I want you to be able to see government as it is, to see others as they are, and when the inevitable emotional appeals come at you from politicians and from government agencies, you will be able to be a wise consumer of this information. You will think first and act second. And you will always have a strong foundation for what you believe in. You will see that government, warts and all, can be a good force if we keep it at bay, if we treat it responsibly. Don't know how better to wrap that up, but we'll talk more about it Monday, and then we'll talk a little econ. Take care, guys. We'll see you Monday.